Hello and welcome back to Government or Civics and Economics, however you want to call it. But today we're going to look at the political process in video lecture number 5. We're going to look at specifically elections and how people run for office, how they win elections, that is political campaigns, and we'll see how far we get. So we'll try to keep this on the shorter side. I may just stop at some point. I've also embedded some videos for you guys to watch, and I think that as we get into something like elections that are dynamic, that involve real people running for office and trying to talk to people. One of the things you'll notice with elections is candidates for elected office really need to reach out and speak to people. And that's really easy today, or much easier than it was, say, 100 years ago, because we have all sorts of electronic media available to us that makes it more interactive, more live. So that's why I put a couple of videos in. I'm not expecting you to watch. There's one video, I think, of nominee Mitt Romney in the 2012 presidential election. It's a 46-minute video. I'm not expecting you, so please hear me, not expecting you to watch that entire video, but it's there for you to watch a minute or 2 or 3, etc. So let's get started with this video lecture, and let me flip to the slide. So the goal of this lecture is going to be to look at the idea of voting, the electoral process. An electoral process, elections, involves voting, and you can see that nice little button over there. Every vote counts. That really is true. However, so many American citizens that are able to vote, 18 and over, choose not to. It's a surprise to me. Your vote is your voice. So your vote is your voice in the American political system. A system of democracy requires people to participate, in the best and easiest way for most people is to vote, yet most people don't. You can look at political campaigns and financing, and over to the right you'll see a political ad, President Obama in 2012, and later we have somebody from the Republican side, so we try to keep it balanced, and the idea of political campaigns and how those operate, and the financing that goes into political campaigns. And then last, selecting candidates. Now, we might not get to point number 3. That might have to be in video lecture number 6, so that this does not go too wrong. So let's start with a simple statement. Let me flip over here. By Louis L'Amour. Louis L'Amour was an author, an American author, not well known today, but he said this about politics, and I think this is a good starting place. Your vote is your voice. It's worth repeating. It's simple. Your vote is your voice. So stop the lecture at this point. Ask mom or dad, what does it mean? What did Louis L'Amour mean? Your vote is your voice. Record your answer in your notes, actually, so that if I collect these, when I collect these, I can actually read what your parents had to say. So as we move through this lecture, we're going to look into this idea of your vote is your voice. We're going to learn some basic vocabulary also, in order to better understand the electoral process. So you might want to write down these terms: hard money, soft money, write-in candidates, caucus, direct primary, which can be closed or open. And I think that's all the vocabulary we're going to look at now. And in addition to looking at the voting process, we're going to look at the idea of organizing and financing campaigns. Organizing and financing campaigns, choosing candidates, selecting candidates. How does one become a candidate? And then later in the next lecture, we'll look at voting and voting behavior, and then some Supreme Court decisions, namely Buckley v. Valeo, but that's for another time. So right now, voting is the most basic way that people participate. That is, they get involved in our political system. So here's another thing that I found interesting, again from Louis L'Amour. To make democracy work, we must be a nation of participants, not simply observers. One who does not vote has no right to complain. So to make democracy work, we must be a nation of participants. And after all, democracy, rule of the people, demos and krasi, rule of the people really requires that participation. And again, we said your vote is your voice. So the way that most people in the United States, and in fact most democracies throughout the world, the participation comes through the simple act of voting. So look at this guy over here. You might recognize him. Does he participate? You might ask him yourself in class. So moving on. Kind of funny, right? Uh-oh, we've got Mitt Romney where we don't want Mitt Romney. Let's see. Well, Anyway, I don't know what to do about this, but you'll just have to bear with me. So what is a political campaign? You can see in the right, you can see some different posters from different political campaigns. You see buttons. They were very popular in the early part of the 20th century. Into the middle of the 20th century, these campaign buttons that people would wear around to proudly announce who they supported. You can see Mitt Romney over there. "We believe in America" was his campaign slogan. President Obama in 2008, "Yes, we can" was his political slogan. So what goes into political campaigns? Guys out there like Mitt Romney, a candidate for the Republicans, Barack Obama, candidate for the Democratic Party, and they go head to head. And remember that the ultimate goal is to win elections, because when you win elections, then you have earned the right to govern, to control policy, to implement policy and regulations. So the idea is you want to win these elections. So these candidates go head to head, and they have to engage the American people, especially presidential elections. And remember that the constituency for presidential elections is the entire nation, though with the Electoral College, some states are more important than others, and we call those states swing states. In fact, Pennsylvania, along with Ohio, our neighbor to the west, are swing states, along with Florida, possibly Illinois, Wisconsin, several other states. So the idea is political campaigns are the organization that supports a candidate for elected office. So let's see. Now, it's really kind of simple, right? Then, so candidates for office, using their political campaigns, go to the people, try to persuade the people to select them in an election and win the election. So it's simple, right? It should be simple. Yet, how easy is it to reach all the voters, especially in a presidential election? Now, if you look at congressional elections, for the House of Representatives in particular, there are 435 districts. Districts are much smaller, so it's much easier for a candidate running for the House to go out in his or her district and meet a lot of people and talk to people, go to events, hold events, and get the message out. But when you run for the president, the entire nation is your constituency. So that's not easy. And so that's why we talk about these things called political campaigns. And in order to get the message out, in order for candidates to actually go out and meet the people, talk to the people, get their message out, it requires a lot of money. And that's the last thing you kind of see down there. You see money. Money is something that is quite integral and important to the process of politics. In fact, it's often been said that money is the mother's milk of politics. Money is the mother's milk of politics. So, as we move on, in terms of political campaigns, you can watch this little snippet there from Barack Obama. There's also Mitt Romney. You'll see him later as well, so you can stop the lecture and watch a couple of minutes of those videos on YouTube. So I want to go back to Harvard historian Arthur Schlesinger Jr., a name we've encountered when we discussed his idea of the vital center. And Arthur Schlesinger Jr., a Harvard historian and student of politics, remarked that elections in the United States have moved from labor-intensive, and by labor-intensive he meant people walking the streets door to door, knocking on doors, handing out literature and talking to people, or candidates themselves going from town to town, giving speech after speech after speech, to capital-intensive, that is, large amounts of money used to buy ad time for television and radio and internet types of messages and maintaining websites. So I think Arthur Schlesinger Jr. helps us understand that through the 20th century we've seen a real shift from labor-intensive, that was politics done at the local level, in local towns and communities, the precincts, the voting wards that make up each district, to capital-intensive, that is, large amounts of money, a few people working, or there are probably many people working on a national campaign, but relatively few, if you will, working on a national campaign, but using media outlets to get out the candidate's name and ideas and messages. So there's been a real shift. Other scholars, I don't have names to provide for you, have noted that it was party and party organization, so go back to the political parties that we studied, that really made the difference in winning elections. Which party whichever party could mobilize more supporters, handing out leaflets, getting people registered, getting people to come out on election day, tended to win elections. And now, however, it seems that the new way of winning elections involves raising lots of money to support the candidate. So, oops, I didn't want to do that. Stop that. Go back. You guys can do that. So the idea now is a shift from people to money. And I guess that's a question. Is that a good thing? I don't know. Is that a good thing? Where does this money come from? And then again, it reminds me of that old saw, follow the money. And if you follow the money, you'll get to some better understanding or some truth about how our political system works. So again, the question, is it a good thing that our political system now seems to be dominated by money and candidates that really have an ability to raise lots of money? And that's a question. You might ask your parents about that too. So stop the lecture, jot down an answer. So let's move on so we can wrap up. How do you become a candidate for elected office? Well, there are a couple of ways, and I've written them down there, and you can see them. Self-nomination. You say, I want to be a candidate. However, you know that we have political parties. So somehow, you, individual, if you want to run for elected office, have to be connected to a political party, unless you can go through the procedures of getting signatures on a petition to get yourself on ballots in certain districts in certain states. So it's a very complex issue. We're not really going to go into it. You can ask questions in class and we can maybe try to address that and develop that a little bit more in class. But there's this idea of self-nomination. There's also something called the write-in. And if you look at that ballot over there for U.S. Senator up in the state of Alaska, you can see down at the very bottom there's a name written in on a blank line. Lisa Murkowski. She's a write-in. She wasn't one of the candidates from the Republican or Democratic Party. She was a write-in, and she got enough people to write her name in on the ballot. There's also something called the caucus, and you can see that below down here on the left. A caucus, still used in Iowa today, is a meeting of citizens in each district, in each precinct that get together, and they have a conversation, and then they determine who they want to be the candidate. So they have this informal conversation, and you can see people standing around a table saying, okay, well, I want Jack, I want Jim, I want Joe. And this is called the caucus system. The last way is the primary, and they're open and closed primaries. We don't need to worry about the difference just yet. But primaries are when voters in the different districts and states actually go to the polls in a primary election. And a primary election, primary being first, number one, is the first election. And again, we've talked about this when we discussed politics back in the fall, but primary elections are usually held in the late winter months into the spring. And so they're coming up. We're coming up to primary season right now, in fact. And primary elections are used when there's more than one candidate from a political party that wants to run for that office. So this year in Pennsylvania, 2014, there's an election for governor. The Governor Tom Corbett, a Republican, is going to run again for the Republicans. He's the incumbent. He can run for 2 terms, and he will. So that leaves the Democrats. Who's going to oppose Tom Corbett in this fall's election for governor? Well, there are 4 or 5 different Democrats who would like that honor. How do we, as Pennsylvanians, select? Well, we have a primary, and the primary is when all the Democrats in Pennsylvania go to the polls in May, and they select their preferred candidate to oppose Corbett. So that's what's called a closed primary, which we have in Pennsylvania. That is, only members of the Democratic Party can vote in the Democratic primary. The Republicans will have one too. Of course, it's going to be a no-brainer. Tom Corbett will be the winner. So that's the idea of how one becomes a candidate. Now you can see that up in the upper right-hand corner, in presidential elections, there are things called big conventions. And after the primaries are held in all 50 states, the 2 parties, Democrat and Republican, have these big conventions at which they select candidates for the presidency. So this doesn't apply. Presidential elections are different than House and Senate elections. But here you can see down below Mitt Romney speaking in 2012 to the Republican convention down in Tampa, Florida, and he accepts the Republican Party nomination for the presidency. So you can take a look and a listen to Mitt Romney's acceptance speech. So last topic. Nope, that's it. We're going to conclude with that. We will get into the idea of money the next time, and we'll talk about different ways people can contribute to campaigns and the idea of hard money versus soft money, campaign limits, and that's a real hot topic right now, is the idea of how much money is good or is too much money bad for politics. So thank you. Write down questions. I look forward to them.